Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. My friend Alex is an accountant with his own firm. He mostly handles small to mid-sized businesses as clients. A few years back, he had this one client who owned 4 nightclubs spread across 2 nearby cities. Let's call him Dave. Dave was always a bit sketchy, constantly delaying payments and making excuses. Funny thing is, I was a regular at one of Dave's clubs. They hosted a popular poker night every Thursday that I attended. One evening, I was over at Alex's place knocking back some beers when he started venting about this client who owed him a massive sum and kept dodging payment. Though reluctant to name the client at first, he eventually slipped and mentioned it was Dave. Dave, the guy who owns those clubs? I asked, surprised. That can't be right. His place is always packed on Thursdays. Alex's eyes widened with interest when I mentioned the special cash discount Dave offered. 15% off your total bill if you paid in cash. The gears started turning in his head right then. A few weeks later, Alex called and asked if he could tag along to Dave's club for the poker night. Sure, why not, I said. After losing our cash at the tables and grabbing a few drinks, we headed back to my place since it was closer. That's when Alex laid out his theory. He suspected Dave was severely underreporting his revenue. The cash discount made it easier to hide income. Alex planned to closely examine Dave's finances, piecing together liquor purchases, operating costs like rent and payroll, and comparing it all against the reported revenue numbers. He had full access as Dave's accountant, and that's exactly what he did. After crunching the numbers, Alex concluded that Dave had been underreporting income by 35–40% in just the last year alone. But it went back further. Dave had likely been skimming off the top by at least 20–25% for years. There was simply no way Dave's alcohol and supply purchases matched up with the paltry revenue figures he provided. He was blatantly lying about his earnings to avoid paying the proper taxes owed. Dave ended up owing Alex enough in unpaid fees to buy a brand new motorcycle, though Alex never disclosed the exact amount. At this point, Alex decided to stop pursuing Dave for payment directly. Instead, he would seek compensation through the IRS whistleblower program, which rewards informants between 15–30% of any recovered tax dollars. With a skilled lawyer's assistance, Alex methodically compiled evidence of Dave's tax evasion over multiple years and submitted it to the IRS. He promptly fired Dave as a client too for non-payment. There was a bunch of legal back and forth after that, but the IRS eventually came down hard on Dave. Turned out he had underreported over $4.5 million in income to the government across several years of operation. Dave lost control of his nightclub businesses as a result. As for Alex, he never disclosed the exact reward amount to me. But he did mention, with a sly grin, "Let's just say I no longer have a mortgage payment. Dave should have just paid me what he owed. It would have been much cheaper in the long run." The next one is an entitled people story. My wife and I had been dreaming of owning a boat for years. We both grew up near the water and have fond memories of long, lazy days spent sailing, fishing, and water skiing. As adults, boating was one of our favorite weekend pastimes, but having to rent boats started feeling like a hassle. We longed for the freedom of having our own vessel waiting at the dock, ready for adventure whenever we wanted. After over a decade of saving our pennies, we finally bought our dream boat. A spacious yet nimble 35-foot cruiser perfect for overnight trips along the coast. As part of the boat purchase, we also secured a permanent slip at the local marina. No more having to reserve a spot and load up all our gear every time we wanted to hit the water. We were over the moon. On our first day mooring the boat, I gave her a good scrub while my wife stocked the galley and brought on board all the essential gear. As we were loading everything into the cabin, we noticed a woman standing at the end of the dock, glaring in our direction. She looked to be in her late 40s, with oversized sunglasses and a pristine tennis outfit. We smiled and waved, but she continued staring with pursed lips. Once we had finished stocking the boat, she marched over. "Excuse me, but do you mind telling me what you're doing?" she snapped at us, not even attempting a friendly greeting. I explained that we had just bought this boat and were moving it into our new slip. "Well, I don't know who told you that you could put your boat there, but you simply must move it at once," she demanded. My wife and I exchanged confused glances. "I'm sorry, what's the problem exactly?" I asked. "This entire dock is reserved for my boat and my boat alone," she huffed. "I will not have it cluttered up with anyone else's vessels." Now it was starting to make sense. This must be the infamous Doc Karen that the Marina office had warned us about. They mentioned a woman who felt entitled to the entire marina and gave new boat owners a hard time. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," I said politely. "We purchased this boat and signed a lease for this slip. We have just as much right to be here as anyone else." "Absolutely not," she snapped. "I will not stand for this. That is my private docking area, and your junky boat is trespassing." I was trying hard to stay calm and reasonable, so I showed her our dock slip rental agreement from the marina, but she refused to even glance at it. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are," she seethed, "but if you don't move this piece of trash immediately, I will call the marina office and the police and have them force you out." At this point, my patience was wearing thin. "Ma'am, I ask that you please lower your voice. Threatening to call the police on law-abiding boat owners is wildly inappropriate. I'm going to have to ask you to leave us alone." Well, that only made her more furious. She began snapping photos of our boat with her phone. "For evidence!" she shouted. Then she proceeded to call the office, demanding they remove us at once from her dock. Of course, the office staff knew we were in the right and told her as much. But she refused to back down, calling them incompetent and threatening to have them all fired. Eventually, she gave up on them and said she would be calling the police next. At this point, my wife and I decided we would go straight to the marina office ourselves to explain the situation and make sure they had official documentation showing we had every right to be there. When we arrived, the staff were extremely apologetic about her behavior. They pulled up their records showing that we were assigned to that slip and that the woman named Karen Smith did not in fact own any exclusive rights to the dock as she claimed. They assured us not to worry and that they would handle Karen. Just then, 2 police cars pulled up with lights flashing. Karen had followed through on her threat to call them. The poor officers looked bewildered as she immediately accosted them, screeching about trespassers and property theft. Calmly, the marina manager stepped in and explained to the police that we did in fact have the legal right to be there. He showed them all the paperwork, lease agreements, and docking records that proved our case. Meanwhile, Karen was getting more shrill and hysterical by the minute, seeing her lies crumble. She made a grab for the documents, insisting they were fake. At that point, an officer had to restrain her. Despite all the evidence against her, she continued spewing her wild accusations. Her behavior was so erratic that the officers had no choice but to detain her briefly. As she kicked and screamed about suing everyone in sight, they finally disclosed that this was not her first episode. The police and marina staff knew all about her history of raging against innocent boat owners. She had been formally banned from the premises, but routinely still came back to harass newcomers like us. Given her complete refusal to calm down and inability to have a reasonable discussion, the officers informed her she was under arrest for disorderly conduct and making false accusations. I have to admit, watching them lead her away in handcuffs gave me quite a bit of satisfaction after the nightmare she had put us through on our special day. The cherry on top came a few days later when we received a call from the marina manager. They informed us that following her latest antics, their board had voted to permanently revoke her membership and ban her from the premises entirely. A restraining order was being filed against her as well to keep her away from us and other boat owners. I guess Karen finally pushed them past their limits, and now we could enjoy our new boat without living in fear of her deranged wrath. My wife and I happily sailed off into the sunset, leaving Doc Karen far behind on the shore. The next one is a petty revenge story. So to keep it simple, yesterday, I got a Siamese fighting fish, or known as a betta fish, named Eclipse, due to obvious reasons. I unfortunately didn't have a proper aquarium for it. So I made one out of a large storage container from Home Depot, plastic, a coffee mug, sponge filter plus air pump, and a little bit of sand. Wasn't perfect, but it would do until then. So my aunt complains earlier this morning that, why you got this big-ass container for this small-ass fish, and it don't need all that crap. For those who don't know, betta fish need at least a 5-gallon tank. So I tried explaining to her that this isn't one of those carnival goldfish and needs certain criteria to thrive. And that didn't work. Anyway, I leave off of school. I get a call from my girlfriend, God, I ducking love her, that I can have her old 30-gallon aquarium plus filter and heater. I leave 2 hours early from school to put Eclipse in his new home only to find that she took upon herself to dismantle my makeshift fish tank piece by piece, leaving Eclipse dead in a Tupperware bowl filled with freezing cold water in the middle of my bedroom floor. When I confronted her, she said, I told you her don't need all that crap, and that's what fish do. They swim and die. Bet. So once she left to run errands, I went into the living room and grabbed her picture of her deceased grandfather, the only thing she has left related to him. And I dismantled the frame, bit by bit. And when she comes back home, where she's going to find the picture? At the bottom of the bowl, torn in shreds, in freezing cold water, in the middle of her bedroom floor. Sure, it might be a fish, but it was my fish, my money, my joy, literally murdered in cold blood. Welp, tonight she's gonna learn just how little things can make a big difference. Swim in peace eclipse, who lasted as long as her namesake. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 4 years ago, I decided to downsize and purchased a 29-foot fifth wheel for my 3 cats and myself. I was fortunate enough to find a spot in a park that was nearly perfect for us. Almost everything I needed was within walking distance or a 5-minute drive, and my cats were allowed to roam freely on the condition that they used an outdoor litter box I maintained in my space, and they did not cause any problems such as noise or fighting with other cats. The rent was reasonable and fixed for 2 years with all utilities included except for electricity, so I was honestly thrilled. A year and a half went by, and all seemed well until one evening I returned home from work to find a note taped to my door. I unfolded it to discover that a complaint had been made against my cats to park management, and I needed to come into the office to discuss some matters. This was my first note from management during my time there, and my only real interaction with them had been the occasional wave as I passed by the office or the monthly rent payment ritual. It was already 1845, so I decided to wait until the next morning. To avoid further complications, I brought my boys inside for the night and settled into bed around 23 o'clock. I awoke around 8:15 to someone pounding on my door, which actually loosened the hinge pin on my interior door handle, and I opened it to meet Karen. Not only did she truly embody the very essence of the stereotypical overbearing manager, her name was also Karen. "Can I help you?" I asked, bleary and barely awake. "Hi, I'm Karen, the new park manager, and we need to talk about your cats," she said, visibly energized, likely from her 5th bottle of cold brewed coffee. "Yes, I saw your note and was planning to come by when I got up," I responded. "Well, the office has been open since 7 o'clock, so I just thought you were avoiding me," Karen retorted. "I typically work nights, so I'm not usually up at 7 o'clock, I explained. "Oh, so you're the roll out of bed around noon type then," she said in a tone that sounded incredibly condescending, whether intended or not. "Usually closer to 10 o'clock, but I'm awake now. Let me throw on some people clothes and I'll be right over," I replied, mirroring her earlier Kai. Karen nodded awkwardly, probably realizing for the first time how ridiculous she sounded, and walked back to the office. I am not a morning person, as I have some medical issues that require a morning routine involving food and lots of water, or I spend the day in bed or the restroom. Assuming this would not take too long, I popped in a coffee pod while I got dressed and fed the boys, then strolled to the office with a cup in hand but no food, water, or pills in my system yet. "I was about to start thinking you'd gone back to sleep," Karen said as I arrived. It had been 15 minutes maximum since she had left, 20 since she had awakened me. "Sorry, I had to feed my cats and wake up a bit," I said, gesturing with my mug. "Now what can I do for you?" "Well, your cats are the issue we're here to discuss. We've had complaints that they've been harassing some of the other guests' smaller animals, and people have said they've seen animals defecating under your trailer, which is a violation of the space rental agreement," Karen explained. "Wow, I'm sorry to hear they're attacking other animals. I didn't think they were aggressive like that. As for the defecation, I have an addendum to my rental agreement that allows me to have an outdoor litter box. I can show it to you if you like," I offered. "No, I know about your agreement," she said, using air quotes unnecessarily. "But that's up in about 6 months, so I think it's time we renegotiate the terms." "So basically, we're talking about changes that need to be made by the time this lease is up, and you're giving me a 6-month heads up? Cool," I replied, trying to maintain diplomacy. Yes, that's the gist of it." 15 minutes and several mk's later, I walked out of the office with a horrible stomachache and a few pieces of important information. 1. An outdoor litter box would be permitted as long as it was enclosed and not under my trailer. 2. Permanent or freestanding enclosures were not allowed. 3. My cats would be permitted outside as long as they were in an enclosed area or on a leash. 4. Pet fences over 3 feet high were not permitted and must be removed when not in use. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I set out to find a solution to the problem. but I kept running into one obstacle after another that would break the rules. So after about a week of frustration, I decided to ask for a copy of my upcoming lease renewal, as I like to adhere to the letter of the law. Karen gleefully printed it up and signed it in front of me, as apparently she had already drafted it and was expecting to deliver it to me well before the end of my current lease. I did not even look at it until I got back to my place, but then, cue malicious compliance. The new lease stated essentially what I thought it would. Basically, that if I could find a way to adhere to all of these rules simultaneously, there would not be a problem, but the tiniest infraction would result in a park fine. I began looking at the technical definitions of the words used in the lease and finally discovered something that worked in my favor. Freestanding. Not supported by another structure. This was it, my ace in the hole. I was still making payments on the trailer, and one of the stipulations of the finance agreement was that I maintained full coverage insurance on it until it was paid off. That meant that I could potentially report any damage to any part of the trailer, inside and out, to my insurance company, and they would cover it. My door awning, a standard 16-foot by 8-foot vinyl awning, was about 20 years old and badly in need of replacement. So I called around and found a place that does awning repair and installation, as well as solarium design. I met with a consultant, Mick, on Friday afternoon and told him exactly what I needed and why. He smirked and asked for my insurance information, then told me he would call me the following Monday. Monday rolls around and my boys have been inside all weekend, so we're all going a bit crazy being cooped up together for so long at a time, and I was awake at 9 o'clock when the phone rang. I ran to it gleefully, expecting to find Mick on the other end of the line. But instead, I found a representative from my insurance company, who was calling to inform me that my repairs had been covered, and my deductible was something like $430. Not ideal, but given the scope of what was about to happen, I did not mind too much. I went to the office and told Karen's husband, Dave, that I was having my awning repaired, and I was just waiting for an installer to call me. Fast forward 10 days. Karen and Dave went out of town for the weekend, so while they were gone, Mick and his crew spent 9 hours over 2 days putting up an absolutely gorgeous screened outdoor dining enclosure with a snap-on canvas outer shell, and the whole thing was supported by the awning bracket and a cleverly designed series of poles that made absolutely certain that there was no way it could be interpreted as freestanding or permanent. And since it was definitely not a fence and completely enclosed my outdoor litter box, I had complied with the letter of the law. Now I prefer to err on the side of caution, so I also implemented a contingency plan. I have a particularly crafty friend who enjoys a challenge and was very much in the spirit of what I was trying to do, so he helped me build a 10-foot by 7-foot interior wooden enclosure that used the poles for the side screen wall of the awning extension as its primary support, so again, not freestanding. We also isolated a path between the RV door and the enclosure door, as well as blocking off the undercarriage to help corral the cats. Sunday evening, Karen comes home to find this classy, gigantic fumigation tent attached to my RV, and as expected, throws a fit. She comes stomping over but cannot find the door flap. It was not marked. If I wanted her to know, or if she had bothered to ask, I probably would have told her, but she did not give me the chance. So she walks back to her car, drives over, and starts honking her horn until I come out. Mind you, I am sitting about 15 feet from her inside the enclosure, calmly smoking a cigarette and petting one of my cats. I let the honking go on for about 30 seconds. As predicted, she started screaming at me about how this was clearly a violation of the lease. But I spent the next 15 minutes showing her exactly how it was, not in any way. And since the lease made no distinction as to what I could do but focused rather on what I could not do, size restrictions, etc., there was no language indicating that I had done anything wrong. Karen then tried to claim that the lease agreement was 6 months out and could still be changed, at which point I pulled out the signed copy she gave me and showed her that I had signed and dated it the day she gave it to me. She then tried to argue that I had forged her signature and created the document myself. I then informed her that I had sent a copy of the document to my insurance company a few weeks prior, and we were both in the office under the surveillance cameras when she printed, signed, and handed it to me. They still have one of those old 4-panel black and white surveillance systems, and the monitor is on the counter in the office, right underneath the camera covering the entire office. I cannot remember what happened next exactly, but I do know that Karen tried to remove the non-load-bearing screen wall that isolated the door pathway, and ended up getting stuck in the screen, breaking the frame, falling over, and threatening me with a lawsuit, at which point my neighbor came over and stated loudly through the enclosure that it was not soundproof and he had heard everything that happened. Bob, I could kiss you if you were not so weird and gross. In the end, I got to keep my enclosure, and several other people in the park noticed my solution and did the same as quickly as possible. Within the next few months, I became something of a hero to some of the longtime residents of the park because apparently I was not the only one being harassed. I was just the first one to find a solution. Oh, and as it turns out, the complaint was made by Karen to herself because she wanted to let her small dog run around but could not stop him from chasing cats. That was 2.5 years ago, and I am still in the same spot. Karen and her husband, on the other hand, were found to be too volatile to manage the park, and were relocated by the same owner to a 24-hour storage warehouse outside of town where they provide on-site security. I still see them every so often when they come to get propane because it is cheaper here, even though they do not get the park resident discount anymore. I have a bit of a wood shop set up in my new space outside, and I now have 6 cats, a wife, and a stepdaughter who all love their indoor-outdoor porch. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.